What is up everyone, Mark here, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. Today I'm going to be giving a review of Måneskin's new album, Rush. And this was a much anticipated album. I'm a huge fan of Måneskin. I've been following them for some time, and I finally had the chance to see them live last month. So this release was really exciting for me, when I was looking forward to a lot. And here's what I have to say about it. In this video, I'm going to be listing a couple pros and cons I have for the album, as well as my favorite songs, and my final thoughts and rating of the overall album. So with that, let's kick things off with my first pro, which is the fact that this album has almost an hour's worth of music. There is a lot of content in this album, which is great, and there were a lot of new songs on it. I wasn't quite sure how many songs the album was going to have, and before it released, I was a little bit concerned that it would just have songs that we've already heard, but no, there's a bunch of new songs in this album, and a lot of them are really good too. So it's great that we have so much content, so much new music, and that I can just spend an hour of my day listening to this album. There's 17 songs, which is a lot. When I reviewed Panic! At the Disco's Viva Las Vengeance, that was, I think, their second longest album, and that was only 12 songs. So when I saw that there were 17 songs, I was pretty happy. I was like, yes, almost a full hour of Måneskin. This is great. Sign me up. And so that was one of the big pros of this album for me at first. But as I went through the album, I started to discover some cons. And not all of these cons are super major. For me, they don't really break the album at all, but they are still things I want to point out in this review. And so let's move into my first con, which is the lack of Italian, or the fact that there weren't that many songs in Italian. And this applies more so to the new songs, to be honest. A lot of the new songs were not in Italian. There were a lot of great new songs, but a lot of them, yes, were in English. And of course, that's not something that really bothers me too much. And a song being in English does not make it inherently bad to me, but I really would have liked to see more songs in Italian. And so that kind of left me wanting a bit more. That was actually one of my concerns going in, and one thing I had a comment for in my concert review after I went to see the Loud Kids tour, which was that there weren't that many songs in Italian. And I really was hoping they would go back to their roots a little bit more, maybe have more than just a few songs in Italian on this album. That wasn't a huge detractor for me, but it just was a little bit disappointing. I think it would have been something that a lot of people liked, and I think it is a pretty popular opinion that we want to see more songs in Italian from Måneskin. And even though they are catering to a more global audience now that they are super famous, I think global audiences really would have been receptive to more songs in Italian. So I hope that in future albums and in future releases that Måneskin does bring a lot more Italian, whether that's just a few lyrics or the whole song, because like, you know how K-pop has songs that are mostly in Korean, but then they throw in some English here and there, and those songs still go viral overseas. I think Måneskin can do the same thing. They don't have to sing all in English. They can do really well singing in their native tongue, but maybe throwing in a few English words here and there, or vice versa, singing in English and then adding Italian words here and there. That's just my 2 cents. Would have loved to hear more linguistic diversity, but still not a huge con, just something I wanted to point out. And with that, let's get into my next pro, which is that the album doesn't sound the same throughout. This album has a pretty good mix of fast-paced, heavy rock songs with slower-paced and more emotional songs. And I feel like this album does that without being too inconsistent. After all, Måneskin is good at making a lot of different types of music, and I think that this album showcases their ability to really do well in different genres. And that also helps the album from feeling stale. It's not just a bunch of rock songs, and it's not just a bunch of slow songs. It is a pretty good mix of both, and it makes the album a lot more interesting to listen to. And I gotta say, both the rock songs and the slow songs are done pretty well. Damiano has a fantastic voice, and it's great to hear him use that voice for different types of music. And one thing I like too is that they use a lot of different instruments in this album. It's not just guitar, it's not just drums. In the song If Not For You, they do actually use strings in the background, which I like a lot. It shows that Måneskin can do well with different kinds of music, and I love that this album does showcase a lot of their different and unique talents. So with that, let's move on to my next con, which is the fact that some songs don't sound so unique. And this mostly applies to a lot of the rock songs on this album. What I mean to say here is that some songs are very well done, but they don't do much different with the genre, in particular with the rock genre. And I find that a lot of these songs also sound very similar to songs that have come before them, which is not always a bad thing. Again, a lot of bands like to pay homage to other bands, but in this case I felt that it kind of detracted from Måneskin's authenticity, from their uniqueness as a band, and that also wasn't helped by the fact that a lot of these songs were all in English and just kind of sounded almost exactly like something I would have heard on the radio back like in the 80s or 90s. And one thing I like about Måneskin, especially in their past work, is that they have such a unique sound that you can tell you're listening to a Måneskin song. Some of the songs in this album, however, not so much. I do feel like some of these songs could have been written or sung by almost any other band and sounded basically the same, which is not something that I think we've come to expect from Måneskin, a band that has been known to push the limits and do things differently. So that's one thing I didn't like about this album, is just that a lot of the songs did sound very derivative of other songs that have come before them in such a way that makes the songs feel a lot less unique, even if they're paying homage. So for me, just one thing that kind of made some of these songs not stand out as much to me, one thing that kind of made some of these songs not rank that high in my song rankings, and just something that I wish Måneskin addresses in future albums. So with that, let's move on to my next pro, which is great guitar solos. This this album is chock full of fantastic guitar solos that really elevated a lot of these songs and made them some of my favorites. And this goes for both new songs and songs that we've heard before. And by songs we've heard before, of course, I mean songs like Mamma Mia, Supermodel, The Loneliest, songs that have been released before this past Friday. And I just love that about this album. Some of these guitar solos are really iconic, some of the best that I've heard just in general, and really complete a lot of these songs. Now, they do kind of tend to be used in the same way in these songs, and that they often start towards the end of the song, and that's something I'm going to touch on in my next con. But regardless, the guitar solos are, again, phenomenal. I really gotta say the instrumental on all of these songs is absolutely flawless. Ethan, Victoria, and Thomas did a phenomenal job. I don't think there was a single song where the instrumental just didn't work for me, which is saying something because a lot of the times there are some songs that have instrumentals that I just don't click with. And if you remember from my Panic at the Disco reviews, there were definitely some songs like that there. But this album, when it comes to the instrumental, is flawless. Not just the guitar solos, I mean everything else too, the drums, even the strings on songs like If Not For You, all of that is just impeccable. And of course, it goes without saying that Damiano is a phenomenal vocalist, so sonically all of these songs honestly were super impressive to me, and those great guitar solos were really just the icing on the cake. These songs really are so well produced, so well sung, and so well composed that I just have to mention it in this review. The guitar solos, again, really are just the cherry on top for me. But on the flip side, that kind of leads us into my next con, which is the predictability of this album, or moments where I say to myself, here we go again. So like I mentioned about the guitar solos, a lot of these guitar solos do start around the same time in each of these songs, and there were some songs where I was almost expecting a guitar solo, and a guitar solo happened. Again, the guitar solos were good and everything, but I didn't really like that I was able to predict where some of these songs were going, and I didn't like having a guitar solo in every other song, just because it made the album feel so much more predictable. One thing I definitely like in music is being surprised, and I guess you could say I was surprised by this album, but just surprised that they used so many of the same tropes in a lot of these songs, again, especially in the rock songs. And I know I mentioned that there were a lot of different types of songs in this album, which is something that is true, but when it comes to the rock songs in particular, a lot of them did sound very similar, again, not in a way that I felt made them stand out among other songs in the genre, and in such a way that made them really predictable for me. And I guess you could kind of say the same for the slower songs. Again, If Not For You does sound pretty similar to Time Zone, does sound pretty similar to parts of The Loneliest, but for me, it was just the most pronounced on the rock songs, and as someone who is a really big fan of rock is one of my favorite genres of music, it was a little bit disappointing to hear so many of these songs using the same formula, the same structure, and just not doing anything that much different with the genre or with their sound. I just wish they would have spiced things up a little bit more. I wish they would have experimented a little bit more, maybe done something a little bit riskier. I love when bands take a lot of risks, especially in their albums, because that can really pay off and really add to an album's uniqueness. And so moving on from that, let's shift gears to my next pro, which is, in this album, Måneskin is not afraid to get personal, to get vulnerable, to talk about real things that affect them. One thing I was concerned about going into this album was that it would be pretty generic in the sense that a lot of the songs would be about partying, just having fun, their crazy experiences as a celebrity, breakups, basic stuff we hear in a lot of songs nowadays, but this album proved me wrong. Quite a few of these songs, and even some of the new songs, like Time Zone especially, really do tackle real issues and the not-so-shining realities of being famous. Måneskin opens up a lot in this album, especially again in songs like Time Zone or If Not For You, and it makes me feel a lot more connected to this album and this band. I think Time Zone in particular is the best example of this. That song, according to the stories that we have on Spotify, according to the band themselves, is about being away from friends and family for extended periods of time, especially as they have been traveling the world for the past almost 2 years now, and that can be really taxing for a person. It can be really hard for them to be away from their loved ones for a long time, and I think it gets that message across in a really powerful way. Even in some of their more upbeat rock songs, some of the lyrics are actually really deep and real. A lot of them aren't sugarcoating a lot of the downsides of being famous, or just the downsides of that super fast-paced party till you drop lifestyle. It's just something that you really don't get from a lot of songs nowadays, especially not in rock. And Måneskin has done this for a while, and it's something that I think also has helped them build such a loyal fan base, because a lot of these fans, myself included, do feel a strong connection with this band and with the people behind the music, almost precisely because a lot of what they write about, a lot of what they sing about is stuff that we can relate to. It's stuff that is real, it doesn't sound sugar-coated, it doesn't sound fake. And so that is a huge pro for this album, one thing I really like about it a lot, and one that makes it stand out from a lot of other pop or rock albums that we've gotten as of late. And on the topic of song meanings, I also want to add that Spotify actually had descriptions of each of the songs, and they tell you basically what the song is about, their process when they were writing the song. It helped me understand understand a lot of these songs a lot better. Again, songs like Time Zone, I would not really have known the true meaning had I not scrolled down and looked at those stories. So that made me like the album a lot more and is something that made it stand out a lot to me. So with that is going to be my last pro. Let's move on to my last con, which is the album's lack of cohesion. This is also tied into, of course, the song order. So there's a lot of stuff I'm going to be talking about here. And what it really boils down to is that the album doesn't flow from beginning to end. And that's something that kind of bugged me, right? So we start off with Own My Mind, an upbeat rock song, and then only 2 songs later, we are in Time Zone, which is a very heart-wrenching and very real and emotional song. Then that's followed up with Blah Blah Blah, which is a very upbeat and kind of superficial rock song. So right off the bat, the album was a little bit jarring in terms of song order, and I'm not sure what the reasoning was behind putting songs in these particular orders. For me, it just didn't work super well. Again, I felt like the order was pretty jarring, going from super happy and upbeat to songs that are not so happy and not so upbeat, and then right back to happy or superficial or just party songs. Yeah, it just didn't work for me, to be honest, and it made the album feel a lot less cohesive. It kind of made it feel like some of these songs were put together randomly, and I think the only thing for me that didn't feel so random was putting all the old singles at the end, although I still feel like that was a pretty odd choice because it just made it feel like, okay, you're gonna listen to all of our new stuff first, and then now here you're gonna have the old songs that you already know. I kind of would have preferred if they had the songs that were already released sprinkled throughout the album, just to spice things up. I think if they did that, it would have been a lot more tempting for me to listen to it the whole way through on the first go, just because, let's say I wasn't enjoying one of the songs, then it's followed up by a song that I already know and a song that I do enjoy. That just keeps me more invested and more interested in the album and more excited to see what's next, rather than having a lot of songs that we don't know in the beginning and then just leaving all the ones we do know and love all the way to the very, very end. But that's just my 2 cents on that one. I mean, I'm not a musical expert, so I don't know how that would have affected the flow of the album. I just feel like some of the song order choices were a little bit odd, and I really wish that they would have done something a little bit different with that to make it just sound more cohesive, like they were telling a story instead of just adding song after song with no clear purpose or direction. I love when albums have a bit of a story from beginning to end. Like even Panic! At the Disco, right? Like their latest album, Viva Las Vengeance, really felt like it had a story from beginning to end. Even though it wasn't the strongest album in my opinion, I feel like the song order did have some reasoning behind it, and the first and last songs did feel like a beginning and an end, whereas this one, I didn't really feel like there was a beginning or an end in any real way. I just felt like there was a first song and a last song, and that was that. And it also made the middle part of the song, which was mostly newer rock songs that I wasn't that big of a fan of, feel a lot more dragged out, which kind of took me out of the experience a bit and just made me feel like, okay, they're just throwing a bunch of songs together. So that's a long-winded way of saying that the album doesn't feel the most cohesive or the most flowy, so to speak. Isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's not something that I personally like in an album. But hey, I mean, this is what we got, still a really great product and a very fun album to listen to. So that has been my last con, and with that, let's move on to my favorite and least favorite songs, beginning with my least favorite songs. Getting the bad news out of the way first, my least favorite song on this album is Blah Blah Blah. I think that song is pretty weak in my opinion, and the thing with these songs is none of them I think are really that bad per se, but I feel like if there was a Måneskin song that I would call bad, I think Blah 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 is the closest you get. The instrumental, as usual, is pretty solid, but what really bothers me is the lyrics, and the lyrics to me just get on my nerves, especially in the chorus, and it just doesn't sound that good to me. This is just personal preference, of course, but that song is a major skip. I just did not get into it, and again, the song isn't super bad, it just really is not for me. The song also feels superficial. Like I said, the lyrics are not the greatest, and hearing Blah 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 over and over just is not something I want from a song, but again, better than a lot of songs out there right now, and the instrumental, as usual, was perfection. So not the worst, but definitely not the best, and not a song I would listen to again. I think another song that is not necessarily horrible, but just not a song that I think resonated with me that much is Feel. And I know that the song, based on the Spotify description, was supposed to be a little bit experimental, was supposed to be a song that didn't mean anything. It just had lyrics that were supposed to sound good. And while I think the song does sound good, it just feels really basic to me. I feel like this is a song that I've heard dozens of times before. The chorus is also really weak to me, and I just didn't find the song to be that unique, to be honest. Even though they were experimenting, I feel like this is a song that I could have heard from Arctic Monkeys. It just felt like basic indie rock to me, and was not something that I liked that much. And another song I didn't like that much is actually Cool Kids. This song I saw live actually in the Loud Kids tour. I thought the lyrics were a little bit weak, and just them saying Cool Kids all the time I felt was a little bit just cheap. I felt like it was kind of pandering to a younger audience, but not quite doing it that effectively. The song just really was never much my thing. Even seeing it live, I was like, alright, the song is like just okay. But still, none of these songs are bad. Again, way better than most songs out there nowadays. And with that, let's move on to a more positive note, which is my favorite songs off the album. So I would say that my favorite song off Rush really is Time Zone. It is just a beautiful song. I love the meaning behind it, and it just sounds so raw, so authentic, and just really from the heart. And that's one thing I love about, again, Måneskin as a band, that they're not afraid to get vulnerable, to talk about their experiences. And I love how it talks about the difficulties of just being away from family, away from loved ones, being famous, being on tour around the world. That does a lot to a person, and not all of that is good. And that's one thing I love about this song, and it also, again, sounds phenomenal. Beyond that, I really loved Don't Wanna Sleep. That song worked really well for me. The guitar riff sounded amazing throughout, and the song is a bop. I actually added this one to my Like Songs playlist, which is rare because few songs end up on that playlist for me, and the last guitar solo is honestly just the cherry on top. I know I've talked a lot about guitar solos, but this one really worked for me and just made the song stand out so much more. I also liked Mark Chapman. That song was one of the only new ones that was in Italian, and I also love how fast the song is. That last guitar solo also goes really hard, so very much appreciated that. Beyond that, of course, I loved If Not For You. I loved the inclusion of strings on that song, and I also really liked Il Dono Bella Vita, which had a very nice melancholy atmosphere, and I thought that Damiano's voice mixed really well with the guitar in this song. So this is all stuff we're going to touch on in my final song rankings, but just stuff I wanted to mention, my favorite, least favorite songs before we head into that section, which we will head into now. So now that I've mentioned my least favorite and favorite songs off Rush, we will now rank all 17 of these songs, and I'm going to be giving a quick description of my thoughts on each as we go along. So with that, let's start with my least favorite song on the album, which we already know is Blah Blah Blah. The song really is not my thing, it just gets really grating for me after a while, and the lyrics are pretty Again, instrumental is fantastic as always, so for me this gets a 6 out of 10. Moving on from there, Cool Kids. This song, like I said, was never really my thing. The instrumental is great, but the lyrics are pretty weak, and the song just didn't do it for me. I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. I just felt like it was not at the same level as a lot of other Måneskin songs for me. Moving on, I have Feel. The song was just average to me just because it felt like a lot of other songs I've heard, but I did like it. I did get into it after a while, but it still just didn't have the same impact as I feel like a lot of other songs did, so that one gets an 8 out of 10. Moving on, Baby Said. Good song, just didn't stand out to me. Another pretty generic rock song. 8 out of 10. Gasoline. Good song, and I honestly do kind of like how much it sounds like Sweet Dreams in some of the verses, but for me the chorus is a bit weak. I will say the guitar at the end, it did work for me, so I did like that. So for me, this is going to get an 8.5 out of 10. Pretty good, just not one that I think stands out too much. Beyond that is Gossip. Thought Gossip was pretty good. Not super amazing, but still a really good song. Definitely a lot better than other songs we've gotten nowadays, so that gets a 9 out of 10. Same thing with Own My Mind. I thought Own My Mind was actually a pretty good opener. Really fun song. Really kind of gets you in the mood for what's next. 9 out of 10 for that one too. Read Your Diary. I actually kind of like this one. It has great vocals and instrumental, and the song overall did stand out to me, but the chorus did fall a little bit flat, but still overall very good. Liked it a lot. 9 out of 10. Beyond that, La Fine. Pretty good. It's nice to hear Italian rap, so like that a lot. 9 out of 10. Moving on from there, Il Dono Bella Vita. This one does something very different, and I love the melancholy atmosphere of it. Damiano's voice, like I said, mixed really well with the guitar. Not too many critiques for this. From there, Don't Wanna Sleep. The guitar riff here sounds great. I love this one, and the last guitar solo, again, like I mentioned, is really the cherry on top. Makes this all come together. 9.5 out of 10. Moving on from there, If Not For You. This one sounds great, and I love the inclusion of strings. Very emotional, very heartfelt, and Damiano's voice sounds incredible pretty much always, but especially with a lot of these slower songs. 9.5 out of 10. From there, we have Mark Chapman. This was a really nice addition to the album. One of my favorite new songs. I loved the inclusion of the Italian language. I love how fast this is. Again, I love that last guitar solo. Very well done overall. 9.5 out of 10. Moving on, Mamma Mia. A classic. Super fun, and the lyrics are great. 9.5 out of 10. Moving on from there, Loneliest. Heartbreaking, and became one of my favorite Måneskin songs on first listen. 10 out of 10. Moving on from there, Supermodel. Excellent. Another classic that grew on me a lot over the past year. I thought it was performed amazingly in Eurovision, and that only made me like the song so much more. And last but not least, my number one is Time Zone. Beautiful song. Love the meaning behind it. Sounds very authentic to Damiano, to the band, to their experiences as celebrities, and one that I really connected with. I think this song touches on something so universal, and it's just fantastic. And that's why it gets a 10 out of 10 for me and is in my number one spot. So with that, that has been my song rankings and ratings. Let's move on to my final thoughts on this album. To summarize, this album is pretty good, but I feel like it is missing a couple things. More new songs in Italian, a sense of cohesion, and a bit of uniqueness and authenticity in certain songs. However, this album has a lot of really great things about it too. So for me, this album overall is going to get an 8.5 out of 10. I think it is overall pretty well done. However, I wish they maybe would have taken more time to think about the song order and maybe work on some of these songs a bit more to make them more unique or make them stand out, and to experiment a bit more. I know they talked about experimenting with different kinds of music, but I feel like none of the stuff that I found here was that experimental, if you know what I'm saying. I feel like a lot of it was definitely them trying out different genres, sure, but I feel like they didn't really add much new to those genres, other than, of course, Damiano's amazing vocals and Ethan, Vic, and Thomas's amazing instrumentals. Of course, this is only their third major album, and they don't want to risk it too much because, of course, they've only recently, relatively recently, became world famous. But still, I wish they would have kind of pushed the envelope a bit more, kind of tried more things out of the box. But regardless, Regardless, the album still sounds really good. A lot of these songs are some of my favorite songs just in general. Måneskin really is a band that is here to stay, and they deserve every second they are in the spotlight. And even though this album is not my favorite of theirs, I have no doubt that they will impress us with future releases and continue to deliver excellent music. I've been a big fan since before Eurovision and will continue to be a big fan for as long as they're around. So this album, even though again it's not my favorite of their discography, is still one that I like a lot, still one that I will listen to every now and then, and one that I think definitely deserves to get all the recognition it's been getting. With that, I really want to hear what you have to say about Måneskin's Rush. Did you listen to the album? Did you enjoy it? Did you like the album? Did you not like it? Do you agree, disagree with my comments? Let me know down below. I really want to hear what you have to say. And also, were you at the Loud Kids tour? I saw Måneskin in NYC and they were phenomenal. So let me know if you were there, if you saw them during that tour, if you've ever seen them live ever, and what you thought about it. So yeah, this has been my review. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to help support the channel. I would really appreciate it. And with that, thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate all of your likes, subscriptions, comments, all of it. This has been Mark, and I will see you all next time. Peace.